Good afternoon, everybody. Thank you, Nick. Thank you, Drew, and the C3 team for putting on an incredible event today to close out 2025. I'm excited to moderate today's discussion on what is the topic du jour in town, particularly this week, as the House is prepped to move a second wave of regulatory reform bills. And we have two members who have been at the forefront of this debate, advancing solutions that provide the regulatory predictability that we need in this country, not just today, but for the next 20 years. And so very grateful to have Congressman Pfluger and Congresswoman Maloy here, who are really driving forward on solutions. Before we get into the weeds of permit reform policy wouldn't matter if it isn't supporting the scale up and drive forward of technologies or energy in your states and in your districts. And so maybe just kind of start the conversation. What are you most excited about going on in your state? You know, your governors are leaning into this AI and energy moment, Governor Abbott and Governor Cox really pushing forward, and your districts are kind of in the forefront of it. And so maybe Congresswoman Maloy, would you start? What is most exciting to you in the great state of Utah?
Yeah, well, at the really fundamental level, I'm excited that everybody's talking about, producing more energy and permitting reform and how we can produce energy more efficiently. Governor Cox has Operation Gigawatt, his initiative to double the energy output from Utah, and that's fantastic. On a more granular level, we have geothermal research going on in Utah, where we have geothermal resources that can produce energy, but we've got research going on in the West Desert in Utah that'll help produce geothermal energy in other places that we haven't traditionally thought had hot enough resources. And if we can get to the point where we're producing geothermal energy in really landlocked places, they're using directional drilling technology from the oil and gas fields to figure out how to do geothermal where you have a large underground reach but a really small above ground footprint. That could be really helpful to a lot of places in the United States, even some of our foreign partners that don't have a lot of space but have some pretty drastic energy needs. I'm excited about that. And then even nuclear, small modular reactors, Utah's been really on the front edge of a lot of that research and welcoming to the idea of increasing our nuclear energy. And we're not Texas. People don't look at Utah and think, oh yeah, that's a big energy state. They look at us and think national parks and large diet sodas. But it's good to be getting into that conversation and showing people that you don't have to be Texas. You don't have to be a huge drilling state to be on the front edge of how do we produce more energy in this country. Everyone in this room knows we need to produce more energy. That groundwork's already been laid. But I think there are certain states that instantly come to mind, and Utah's not one of them, and we're elbowing our way into that.
I mean, geothermal, hot in both of your all states, and I think we're seeing major private sector momentum in that space. We're seeing a significant drive of investors into new innovative technologies, the Evers, the Fervos, the Zanskars of the world that are out there, and it's really exciting to see that take off, especially as the market's demanding affordable, reliable, zero-emission electricity. Congressman Pfluger, how about you? Texas, energy capital of this country, arguably. What is some of the stuff you're seeing on the ground over the last year or two that makes you most excited about Texas's energy leadership?
Well, it's great to be here with you, Jeremy. Thank you. And also with my colleague, Celeste Maloy from Utah, who's doing a great job. She's a friendly face at any energy discussion in the House that we have and puts a tremendous amount of work into, I know, some of the things that we'll specifically talk about on permitting. So it's great to be with you today. Texas is, I think, is a leader in innovation. And the district that I represent, that I'm fortunate enough to represent, includes the headquarters of the Permian Basin, Midland, and Odessa. And over the past 100+ years, that basin has been called dead multiple times, has helped us win World War II by the production of products, including the innovation of high-octane gas as a derivative from oil, and so many other things. But in the last 15 years has gone from producing less than 1 million barrels a day to now over 6 million barrels a day. Wow. And that was after it was called, extended or peak oil or whatever term was in vogue at that time. And that came from innovation. So one of the things that I'm really excited about is continued innovation. And at the same time that we've gone from 1 million to 6 million barrels, let me make it very clear, this is something that we talk about with the EPA all the time, our emissions have come down over 35%. And that's just, that's almost impossible to do when you have a 6x increase in production of oil and a 35% reduction in harmful emissions. So when you think about the innovation, that really, yes, it's encapsulated in my district, it's encapsulated in the oil and gas side of this. I'm excited about our discussion today because it gets at the heart of what I'll call takeaway capacity, which we do not have enough takeaway capacity in this country. We don't have enough in the Permian Basin. We produce associated gas. So LNG is associated, natural gas is associated with the oil production. We have about 15% of the natural gas production, total US production. And I'm excited for permitting to happen, the reform to happen, to move at the speed of commerce to deliver that both domestically and to our allies and partners. And then in addition to that, there are a tremendous amount of data centers and a tremendous amount of just everything, businesses, manufacturing, you name it, chips and semiconductors and all sorts of things that are happening in Texas, and we need more electricity. And I think that the country that is deciding to do this right and that makes the investment environment easy to navigate, that you don't have to compete with Uncle Sam, you don't have to compete against a weaponized government, that's the country that's going to win, and we cannot afford to lose. We have to figure this out. We are at a moment right now, national security-wise, where all of these things that we are doing, our life depends on electrons. And I'm excited because I think Texas is leading in a lot of these, in my district in particular, is leading in these.
We're in a race with artificial intelligence. We're in a race to onshore manufacturing and drive American manufacturing renaissance in this country. We're in a race in things like space technologies. All it's going to require building new infrastructure in this country. And in many cases, energy is the long pole in the tent there. How has this era of rising demand, the increased attention on artificial intelligence and data centers changed the policy conversation that's happening within the U.S. House?
I know Celeste has a lot of thoughts on this, but there's been a lot of talk. You know, we've had a lot of talk. There's been a couple of attempts. You saw the Barrasso Mansion attempt at the end of the last Congress. But I think people realize in a bipartisan way that we need more electricity, that there is going to be a surge in the demand from all the facets that you just mentioned. So there's a lot of talk about it, but then when you actually put pen to paper and you start figuring out where the negotiation space is, because I think the assumption based on our passage of the One Big Beautiful Bill in July is that many things that we want to do in permitting reform won't pass the Byrd rule. Now we can have a separate conversation on whether they should or not. You probably know where I stand on that. I would love to have seen them pass the Byrd rule and go through reconciliation, but they haven't, which means that a bipartisan bill is needed. Yeah. And I think that's the biggest challenge that we face today and this week when we're looking at the SPEED Act is that we know that there are certain things that have to happen. We know that that's going to mean that Republicans are going to be envious about protecting certain equities and likewise for Democrats. So how do we get that accomplished? There are conversations. I'd say that there's probably 2 or 3 thought leaders across the aisle that have stepped up to do this. And most of them realize that if we don't do this, that we're going to end up like Europe, where you can't build anything. You don't have pipelines and roads and bridges and highways and things that you need just to complete, what's needed. Not to mention the national security issues that you just previously talked about.
Yeah, the current regulatory environment is not up to these challenges, and we've got to find a way to establish that regulatory predictability necessary to win those races. Congresswoman, how about you?
Yeah, I think one of the biggest things that I've seen change with the conversation is that we've broken out of some of our old paradigms. Like, we had this down, it was like a dance that we all did for a lot of years, where on our side of the aisle, we would talk about how we needed to build infrastructure, we needed permitting reform, we needed to be producing more energy, and on the other side of the aisle, they'd talk about how if we messed with the legacy environmental bills, then we were going to have the Cuyahoga River on fire and kids breathing toxic fumes, and we'd just kind of we'd go through the motion. We all knew the part we were supposed to play, and I think we've had a big paradigm shift as far as that goes. I am part of the Build America caucus. It is bipartisan, and the whole idea is that we need to be able to build things in this country. And for too long, we've acted like we haven't learned anything as a nation or as policymakers since 1971. And that if we tweak anything, we're just going to go right back to where we used to be. And we did have some environmental problems that did need to be addressed. But we have arguably two whole generations who come of age in a regulatory climate where we have a different ethic around how we build infrastructure, how we do business, how we think of the environment. And during that same time frame, we have this regulatory climate that's built up around those environmental laws, and we keep adding patches. Every time we see something that's not working, we never strip it back down to the bones and say, this is what the Clean Air Act said, this is what the Clean Water Act said, this is what NEPA was intended to do. And we've had a lot of things build up on it since then. We just keep adding another patch. And so we have sort of this Franken environment where the bones of those legacy environmental statutes are still there, but they're kind of hard to find now. Almost all of what people in this room are probably dealing with when you're trying to do projects or policy is the rules and the regs that have come out of 2 generations now of federal agencies and lawsuits and everything else that's part of the federal environment. And what I'm excited to see right now is we're kind of stripping it back down to the bones. And by we, I'm including the court in that. Shout out to the Supreme Court for recognizing this. It was time to overturn the Chevron case. It was time for the 7 counties decision out of Utah about what the extent of NEPA should be. It's time for Congress to go look at how these are actually working in the real world and make some decisions about what needs to be changed. And we're not going through the same partisan talking points every time that we have been going through for years. We're actually getting down to brass tacks. And it's going to be a little bit messy. It was never going to be easy. There are still going to be times when we start to make progress and then people get a little panicky and they back up. And we're just going to have to keep going and going as we get through all of that, because we can build things in this country without destroying our environment. We can make good environmental decisions. I'm getting so excited now I can't say the words. We can make good environmental decisions quicker and cheaper than we've been making them. And there's broad buy-in to that now. I don't have to do the same work to convince people of that I used to do. That's kind of the starting point now. And that is a really exciting change that'd be easy to miss. We're all busy striving all the time, trying to get things done. I know there are people in this room that are trying to get projects permitted. There are people in this room who are looking for certainty on investment. There are people in this room who write about these things. And all of us can kind of start at a new ground zero of it's time to take a look at all of this and see what's working and what's not. And we need to have certainty and we need to go faster. And we used to have a lot of work to do just to get to that point. So it actually is a really exciting moment. It just doesn't look that exciting because we're all still going about our daily lives doing our things.
Congressman, you mentioned the 7 counties case and the Chevron ruling, some of these landmark judicial decisions that really put into question the scope, 7 counties, particularly on NEPA and what are the bounds that we're looking there. How do you see that impacting the motivation for you all to act at the congressional level and the importance of a bipartisan congressional action that exceeds any political administration or any political configuration?
August is going to have a much more polished and a better answer to this than I'm going to. I keep telling my constituents, I feel like the court is saying, I dare you, to Congress over and over. They're reminding us that we are the legislative branch, and when the executive branch gets out too far on rules and regulations and the system bogs down, it's our job to go in and fix that. And they keep reminding us of that. With Chevron, they said they don't owe any deference to agencies. We don't owe any deference to agencies. We're the ones who are supposed to be overseeing them. With the 7 counties case, they reminded us that we wrote NEPA. And by we, I mean, people before I was born. But the legislative branch wrote NEPA and said that agencies have to look at alternatives before they make a decision. What it's turned into is a boondoggle for people like I used to be, lawyers who do permitting and have job certainty till the end of time, because there's always a technicality. But we've almost lost sight of the larger picture, which is that we wanted agencies to have good information when they made decisions. Now agencies are terrified to make decisions because there's always something. There's always a technicality. There's always a court that's willing to say, well, you probably should have spent more time on this. And the court keeps trying to refocus us on, go do your job. Act like you're the legislative branch. We're supposed to be a lot more powerful than we've been acting like we are in this space for a long time.
Congressman, how about you?
Yeah, it's a tale of two cities. Celeste is right. I think they do want us to do our job, to be specific. I think we got here, if you go back to the 1970s, in a way that was not nefarious. It was, let's let some of the experts at the agencies have a reasonable interpretation of what the Clean Water Act or the Clean Air Act or any of the other intents of Congress were. And unfortunately, we've gone well beyond that. Yeah. And innovation depends on a return on investment. And if you can't have at least a reasonable chance of a return on investment, then no company, no individual is going to put capital towards a project that they know that there are factors other than their own success in demonstrating some scalable new innovation that are out of their control that they don't want to compete with, i.e. the regulatory environment. Why does it take 7 to 9 years and hundreds of millions of dollars, billions of dollars, to complete a project that literally you could plan and build in 2 years? I mean, this is ridiculous for our country to have to endure something like that because one group, an activist group, can hold up a project. But that's what's happened here, and that's what we're trying to address in the SPEED Act. And I just think back to World War II, when you're building things in these factories that we were building. I'm a pilot. We were literally building hundreds of airplanes a day. I don't think that we could even come close to doing something like that because of the regulatory environment that we find ourselves in. Yes, regulations are good. Haven't found anybody in industry that doesn't want some left and right boundaries. Yeah. But they also want to be able to compete with one of our main competitors, which is China, that is building new energy sources, namely coal plants, in order to do the things and service the needs of the rest of their manufacturing. We have to be able to compete with that, and I think that's why this conversation is so important. So the tale of two cities is, on one hand, you have a regulatory environment that says, I'm going to make you jump through every imaginable hoop and hurdle in order to prove that you have complied. What we are offering is the alternative. Let's get back to that it is assumed that your project is in compliance. It is assumed that when you do an environmental impact statement and an environmental review, that the facts are straight, we've done the due diligence, the public comment has been opened, and it's assumed that you comply and can move forward. And that, to me, is how we succeed in this country, and we've got to get back to that.
Amen.
Well, and I'm going to jump back in, but it captures the reality of we've done this before. So many of the things that we're trying to permit are almost routine. There's nothing novel anymore about building a power line or a bridge or a road, and even some types of power plants. We've done them before, but we act like every time it's brand new technology, no one's ever seen it, and if we don't have 35 different people in Washington, D.C. in different buildings looking at it, then we're probably going to melt the world down and everyone's going to die. And I know that sounds hyperbolic, and yet that's kind of the attitude we've had about permitting for a long time. And I come from a state with a lot of public land, and so we get a special level of dealing with the federal government on routine things. And something like running a grader over a dirt road that's been there for 100 years, we permit it like there's never been a road there before, no one's ever driven a grader before, and we don't know what the impacts are going to be. And it's just time to start treating routine things like they're routine, and doing some enforcement. If there's a bad actor that doesn't comply, then the penalty should be such that there's no incentive to not comply. I mean, if somebody took a grader on a dirt road and drove out through a pristine wilderness, then we've got a problem, and the punishment should fit the crime. But we act like we've never built a bridge before, or and if we don't spend years analyzing the impacts, we're probably going to kill people. And 100 years ago, our forefathers had never built big dams and rivers before, and they figured it out. And the dams are holding, and they arguably won us World War II. And I think they would be shocked if they knew the kind of analysis we put into, routine maintenance on the things they built for us when it hadn't ever been done before.
Congresswoman, you've got legislation that tries to get directly at this, right?
Yes.
A bill that's focused on quote-unquote permit by rule, which means different things to different folks, but inherently it's about taking care of some of these routine items and having a checklist that allows you to kind of drive those forward in a more expeditious way. And then we can focus permitting in limited staff and permitting resources around the more complicated projects. You want to talk a little more about the bill?
Yeah, so the FREE Act tells agencies to go look at the permits they issue and which ones could be done as permit by rule. And if it qualifies for permit by rule, then we ask them to go do it that way. And states and local governments do this all the time. It's not a hard concept to explain to people. They instantly pick up on it. Agencies would have to say, this is what we require in order to issue a permit. And if you provide that, and everything's in order, then you get your permit. If you can't provide that and something's not in order, then the agency tells you what's missing, what you need to do to address that, and once you address it, then you get your permit. And then we do inspection and enforcement. So it doesn't give a pass to people who are trying to cut corners, but it makes it so that agencies, the one thing you always hear from agencies, I'm on the appropriations committee, we have people come in and justify their budgets, the one thing they always say, we don't have enough people, we don't have enough budget, we're being asked to do more with less. I think we should just ask agencies to do less. There are a lot of things they're doing that we just don't need them to do. And I think permit by rule would help take a lot of that pressure off. If you're doing something routine that they've done a lot of times before, they say, this is what we require for the permit, you do those things, they issue a permit. In my experience, when you're dealing with agencies that are really struggling to get something out the door, it's not always even nefarious. Sometimes you have someone there who's not sure. They don't feel confident that they know at what point they can sign on the dotted line. But they don't want their signature on something that the agency loses a lawsuit over. And so we've got this analysis paralysis going, where sometimes you have people who, for ideological reasons, are opposed, and they can drag their feet and make something take longer. And sometimes you've got people who just aren't sure what to do, and it's easier to let it sit on a desk than to take a risk. Saying no is almost always the safest route at a federal agency, and I'd like to turn that around, where we get people to a point where they know when to say yes, and they feel confident about saying yes when what they're doing is the right thing to do. And I'm hopeful that the FREE Act and permit by rule can do that, where even if you are on your third day in an agency, you can look at something and say, well, I know this is what we require for a permit, and you've given us all of that, so I can move this out the door. And I think it makes it so that we can use more technology, and AI can do some of that, going through checking things and making sure it's all there and it's all in order, so that the people at the desks are doing things we need people with expertise to do, and we're not paying a human and all of their benefits and time off to do something that a computer could do quickly, and we can reserve people for people things.
Makes a lot of sense. Congressman, you alluded to this a little bit earlier on the propensity of Congress to move things in bigger packages, right? Many of these policy solutions over the last 4 to 6 years have been in a larger, whether it's a reconciliation bill, an omnibus, the NDAA. The House is taking up the SPEED Act this week. They did a pipeline-focused bill that passed with bipartisan support last week. There are a lot of other ideas like the FREE Act out there that have gotten through committee and could be in play. As you think about next year, what does comprehensive permitting reform look like? What do you think the pieces of that need to be, and how does that interweave with what's going through the House this week?
Well, we'll start with exactly what my colleague from Utah, Celeste, was mentioning, just common sense. The agency shouldn't be in a default no position because that's the easy answer. And we need to give them some very clear guidance and parameters on what that looks like. I'd say secondly, how we get around judicial reform. And you talk to any industry or any company, and I'm sure there's lots of companies in this room. We can make this interactive if you want. But how many of you, just show of hands in the room, have been a victim or had a project slowed down because of lack of judicial reform, because the timelines took too long? Just show of hands on. I think when I'm talking to, especially pipeline companies, people that are in the hydrocarbon business, those that are interested in building something, that this becomes something you can drag out, and you can go to court and you can sue and you can do things where you delay the project over and over and over again. And you can take the same suit to one agency and then go right to another agency after that. So that has to be a pillar. And what the SPEED Act is attempting to do is to start reforming that and have a burden of proof that really puts some common sense into it. And then I'd say, lastly, there's got to be a discussion with the states on, having the ability to maintain their character and state laws, but also a conversation on things like transmission, on things like telecommunications. It's not just pipelines from my district that I'm worried about. But there are lots of things, and it gets tricky because you get into the Northeast. Wouldn't it be nice in the Northeast where you've got the Utica formation and you have the Marcellus formation, where we could deliver American-produced natural gas to the Northeast instead of having to import it from another country, which is pretty much the case every year, where they're importing not Texas LNG, because we have some issues with the transport in the water, but we're talking about gas that's produced and pipelined up to the Northeast and used in a way where the cost comes down. So I'd say those are a couple of the main pillars of permitting, but it's doing things in a common sense way, ultimately, that brings the time back into a reasonable approach, where if you're going to take 9 years, no company wants to take that risk on whatever the project is. Just ask the people the Trans-Canadian folks. Do I have any TC folks in the room on the XL pipeline? I mean, this is a perfect example of how our government basically expropriated a project that not only was approved, but it was also being built, and ended that. We have to get away from that. That's what third world countries do. And our country can't do that. We have to live by law and order, and we have to have a good process and have some trust that process is going to allow these projects to go forward.
Mm-hmm. The project predictability convo has kind of been front and center, was a major focus at House Resources, and the bill was moving forward. And it's a little bit of the conversation among the Republican conference as a whole this week, right? How do you all see about the ensuring that there is confidence in a government permit moving forward, and the kind of frustration that you all have been hearing from private sector entities about changing paradigms when administrations change, whether it's a focus on technology or a type of infrastructure?
So the SPEED Act actually directly addresses that. There's language in the SPEED Act to end that practice of, and I've lived it in real life, I'm sure everyone in the room has, where you've got a project and it's going along and you're hurrying as fast as you can to get things done before the end of an administration, because you have an administration that's friendly to whatever. Plug in what you're doing. Affordable housing, infrastructure, oil and gas pipelines, and then there's an election and you get a new administration, and whatever record of decision you just got gets overturned, and now you know you've got 4 or 8 years of no progress on your project, and that is just not the way a developed country should work. And I was shocked as a freshman member of Congress traveling with the Natural Resources Committee. I was in Asia, and we had people in the governments there saying, we would like to be investing in US technologies, but you have to get your permitting problems figured out because we can't get people to invest if they don't know when the project is going to get built. And I've been saying that for a long time, but being on foreign soil, hearing other countries saying that to us was kind of sobering. Like, this is no way to be a world superpower if we can't get things figured out and decide what we're going to build. And if we do, which I think we're going to, then it's not just that we can build projects faster here, but we can also develop technologies faster here that we can export that solve some of these problems in other countries. Some of our allies need the help too. And if we're not doing it, Russia and China will be. If we're developing technologies that meet our environmental standards, they're probably going to meet the environmental standards in the rest of the world. But if no one's investing here, we're not doing that. There are multiple layers of reasons for us to be getting our house in order, so to speak, so that we can play the role that we as Americans decided after World War II we're going to play in the world. We're not playing it very well at the moment because we internally have to decide who we want to be. Do we want to be a country that produces things and does them in a way that's environmentally friendly, cost-effective, and keeps the world a stable and safe place to travel and do business? Or do we want to stay here, punch each other in the face, and let somebody else be the world superpower and take over world influence? And we wake up one day and realize that we're beholden to a country that doesn't share our values because we stopped playing a role that we know how to play. We've played it, but we've kind of lost track a little bit lately.
Congressman.
Yeah, we have chosen the latter, Celeste, where
by default, yes,
sat around and punched each other in the face and then realized that it's not fun doing business here at times. I'm working with a company that has a project in Mexico, and the project has basically been expropriated from this company. Billions of dollars that has gone down the tubes because they can't trust the government. And I think what we're hearing from industry, from you all, is that instead of having this administration to administration, executive order to executive order approach, put something in statute, codify it.
Yeah.
Write it in statute. The Supreme Court clearly ruled on one aspect of this with the Chevron deference ruling and said, we want you to be specific, we need you to be specific, and that's where statute comes in, where we should be directive on these things. And project certainty is the name of the game. And I mean, I'm seeing it in West Texas every single day. It's not just pipelines. I mean, we're talking about a tremendous amount of work that's being done on these data centers. The small modular reactor game that Abilene Christian has partnered with Natura Energy, and a tremendous amount of work that's going in. And that's one project, and there's many of those across the country. But they have to have the certainty that when they get approved to do whatever it is, when you get approved to do whatever it is that you do best, that it can move forward and we can sell it. And that's the exciting part to me, is that if we get this right, our competitive advantage in this country is innovation.
Yeah.
And if we get this right, our GDP, especially on the expertise of exporting services and intellectual property that we know how to do, it's going to increase and be maximized in a way that I don't think we could ever even imagine. But now is the time to act, and we need y'all's help, because this is a really, really important week. And I'm sure you're going to get to the SPEED Act. I don't want to get ahead of you, but this is a very important week in Congress. And we still have some holdouts. When you do a bipartisan bill, it's not perfect. Not everything that I want is in that bill. And there are some things in that bill that I don't like. That's the nature of what we're trying to accomplish right now. And I would ask you, sincerely ask you, to put as much effort as you possibly can this week into bringing around, especially Republicans who have questions. This is a generational moment. We couldn't get it done during the Biden administration. Maybe another Democrat administration could get it done, but I don't think so. I think now is the time. I think this week is the time. And we need everybody's help in making the case that by passing this, it's one of the most important pillars that we will get passed, and that we can get to the Senate and propose some of the things that make up real reform.
Couldn't agree more, Congressman. I mean, close at the end of last Congress. Obviously, you all tried hard to try to get it through the reconciliation process. This is the moment. It doesn't get any easier after the next election or the next administration. And to your point, it's a national security race. We're not only racing on these technologies, we're racing globally to attract capital. And so every month, year, we wait to try to find the right configuration to get something done. We're squandering time to lead on these technologies.
I was just going to mention it. Sorry, I was just going to mention. I'm chairman of the Republican Study Committee, 190 members, the largest caucus, the largest policy organization in Congress, and we have levied every resource we possibly can muster towards this effort to help the committees of jurisdiction, because it's not just one committee. I mean, you're basically dealing with 3 committees: ENC, TNI, Natural Resources. The Senate has their own committees of jurisdiction that don't exactly match what the House is doing, but this is so important that when we have our weekly lunches and our policy meetings, we are bringing together those committees so that our conference can be educated to pass this. This is a generational moment for us. This will not just affect us this year or the next year. You're talking 40, 50, 60, 70 years. Think about what the Clean Water and the Clean Air Act did 50 plus years ago, and we're there again.
Yeah, and to some extent, this is back to the paradigm thing I was talking about earlier, and that's why I really appreciate what August does with RSC and talking good policy. You know, at the end of the day, we have to do politics, but good policy makes for good politics. And some of what you're probably going to see play out with permitting reform in general and even specific bills is those paradigms we've kind of learned, where there are on one side of the aisle, we're supposed to say certain things, we're supposed to feel a certain way. On the other side of the aisle, we're supposed to say certain things, supposed to say a certain way. But even within our parties, we have factions that are kind of expected to, you know, not get on board or to try to pull things further in one direction or another. And there is a place for that. We get a better outcome when we have disagreement, when people bring up their issues and say, what about this? Have we gone far enough on that? What we've got to learn how to do, though, is get to a point where we have made a final decision and people are willing to support that decision. And the reason I'm talking about that is because I think the people in this room can really help. What happens when someone decides that they're going to be a holdout is they get a lot of attention. They raise a lot of money. Everybody runs to them and says, what can we do to get you on board? Or they want to write an article about why they're not on board. And we always start with the point of disagreement. And if we could take a step back and start at the agreement, we may agree on 95% of it, but we spend all of our time talking about the 5%. And there is a necessary conversation about that 5% to get people on board. But if it bleeds, it leads. And we're always focused on, why do 3 people not want to be part of this? Why is one person, you know, on the floor not voting yet, and everybody's gathered around them trying to make them happy? And I'm Mormon. I'm from Utah. I grew up in a big family. Everyone around me had big families. If this is a classic, like if you throw a fit and won't eat what mom made for dinner and mom has to make something special for you, everybody in the family is going to start wanting something special for dinner. If every time you are the holdout, you get a lot of press and you raise a lot of money and everybody comes to your office to make you feel better, you're going to keep being a holdout. And we have to break some of those paradigms too, where there's got to be a way of rewarding finding solutions and getting things across the finish line. I mean, it is rewarding in and of itself. I sleep better at night when we've done something meaningful during the day. But there has to be a way that the people in this room, the people who are involved, who have skin in the game, who need solutions, can help us get to a point where we're not famous for stopping solutions.
We've got about 10 minutes left, and I want to make sure there's a little bit of time for Q&A. So I'm going to ask one last question, and if anyone who is interested in asking a question, can you guys please go line up behind microphones so that you can use microphones. But I'll ask one last question here. Obviously exciting about the SPEED Act moving forward here at the end of the week, hoping a good final number here by Thursday. y'all want to handicap how many Dems you think come on board, and do we keep the Republican conference together on it?
No.
There's been plenty of energy bills that have passed with 20, 30, 40 Dems. So I would handicap the Dem side. The Republican side is a little tougher to do right now. But I think you probably get 30 or 40 Dems. And I hope that I'm wrong. I hope it's more than that. But I think that that's probably, remember, we're approaching a midterm for them as well.
Yeah.
So I think there's plenty of reason for them to vote for it. Now, I will stay away from the Republican side. I'm not sure yet.
Well, and you touched on this, but I want to give you a chance to reiterate. What can the folks in this room do over the next 72 hours to help both on the Republican and the Democratic side?
I think there are very well-known folks who have good questions that can say, well, it's not perfect. Go talk to them. And let them know how important this is. That if we're getting a first down, if we're moving the ball down the field and we're doing something that is going to be transformative, that, by the way, the president campaigned on, then we're making progress. And I think those conversations in individual offices are really, really important.
Boots hit the ground while you're here in town this week.
Yeah.
All right, we're going to turn it over for a few questions. When we start over here, could you introduce yourself before your question, please?
Yeah, thanks for coming to speak with us today. I'm Sam Lebo, former ClearPath fellow with Senator Sullivan from Alaska. My question is regarding a permitting issue for a less salient topic, which is carbon sequestration. Representative Pfluger, you introduced the Primacy Certainty Act with Representative Crenshaw, a bill which would expedite state approvals for carbon sequestration wells. Earlier this year, Texas was granted primacy authority for Class 6 wells. Utah is actively pursuing primacy as well. My former boss, Senator Sullivan, introduced companion legislation in the Senate. Can either of you speak to the importance of unlocking the existing permitting logjam at the EPA for Class 6 wells and establishing certainty for CCUS project developers?
Well, from Texas, the reason that I introduced that was because we were being held back by the EPA. And the Railroad Commission, which should have the authority in the state of Texas to grant the permits for those wells, was not, didn't have the approval from the EPA. So that's why this bill was important. So can't speak outside of Texas in particular, but I think that makes sense. If you've got a state that wants to do this, and the EPA should be willing, within the bounds of other preemptive type law to grant the permits for it, and especially in the case of carbon sequestration.
Yeah, in general, I just think primacy is a good way for us to go on solving some of these problems. It makes it easier for businesses, voters, consumers to see where the problem is. If there's a big federal policy that is harming your business, you all know, you're here. It's kind of hard to come to Congress and move the needle. It's a little easier to go to your state house, your state legislators, and say, this is how it's harming us in our state. And it could go in either direction. If you think your state's not doing a good enough job protecting your interests from environmental harms, you can have that conversation at the state level and move things a lot faster. If you are in the Northwest and your energy prices are really high and you wish your state would get on board and start investing in a pipeline that brings natural gas from Pennsylvania to your state, you can move that needle a lot faster at the state level. And you can demand a high quality outcome at the state level. It's much harder to move things at the federal level.
Make these decisions closer to folks who are closer on the ground, know the environmental attributes, right?
Yeah.
Rod, would you like to introduce yourself?
Yeah, thank you, Jeremy. Great panel. My name is Rod Richardson. I'm the president of the Grace Richardson Fund, a private foundation, and also the co-chair of the Climate and Freedom International Coalition meeting. We gather together folks like you, think tanks, politicians, journalists, once a month for an online meeting of international groups from Europe, South America, Africa, Middle East, North America, who want to talk about these issues. We'd be grateful to have you as a guest. But what I wanted to ask is, I applaud you guys for pushing on federal permitting reform. But even if you get federal permitting reform, there are still going to be permitting problems at state levels. And this is especially severe in regulated states like Utah. In states like Texas, it takes maybe a quarter of the time to put on new infrastructure into your electricity markets as it does in a regulated market. So what can you do, or are you willing to do to create incentives for the regulated markets to make it easier for them to move to a faster process so that the reform that you do at the federal level isn't, in effect, wasted?
Well, I'm open to suggestion on that. It sounds like you already have some good ideas, so come talk to me and let's look at those. But in general, I mean, this is something that Utah is working on, making sure that state regulations are not mirroring the inefficiencies in the federal regulations. And so back to my last answer, this is why having state primacy on some of these issues makes a lot of sense, because if we have companies in Utah that are trying to develop and the state's hanging them up, it's a lot easier to go change the regulations that are a problem at the state level. And what we need to be doing at the federal level is making sure we are not the problem and we're not standing in the way. There's been an assumption for a couple of generations now that the states are regulating. They don't care as much about the environment. And I think we have ample evidence now that that's not accurate, and we just need to let the states do what they're designed to do.
I'll just add, and we know this very well in my district, because a good portion of the Permian Basin exists in southeastern New Mexico, in 2 counties in particular. And just across the state line, the same basin, the same hydrocarbons, the same exact what should be product, in one state takes a week, in another state takes over a year, which is maddening when you think about the fact that you're a mile apart, less than, on that state line, and if it's for environmental reasons, you're doing what federally should be applied to both states, and that law already exists, so that's the superseding law that exists in the way that the states are carrying this out. So I think there's got to be a carrot and a stick approach to it, but that, I think, shows us even more why we need to codify and to put in statute laws that actually tell you how long the review and how long the analysis and how long the project should take ultimately, with the state then being given some very strict guidelines on how that's going to be built out.
All right, I think we have time for one last quick question.
Just very quickly, Congressman, you talked about innovation, and you talked about how in Texas there's been a remarkable increase in the production of oil and energy and a reduction in emissions at the same time. My name is Fred Pfeffel. I represent, I'm from EPS, Energy Partner Solutions, and I represent a Texas company that has helped with the innovation to reduce the emissions of diesel through the tax light program. And we're trying to expand that and go beyond Texas to the whole United States. So how can we take some of what Texas is doing and leading on and take it beyond the borders? And I'd love to talk to you some more about what we have in mind with my client.
This has been my goal ever since I was in office. That was supposed to be funny, guys, to take what we're doing in Texas and transition it all the way through the U.S. Think about this. I brought one of President Biden's EPA directors out to the Permian Basin. And the individual was shocked at the number of monitoring sites that we had on individual drilling or tank batteries or midstream facilities. Absolutely shocked. Methane detection as one example. But that innovation, I mean, yes, it is for the environment, and my district cares deeply about leaving the land in a better place, but also it's economic. They're capturing that product and they're selling it, and they're doing so because they had the chance to innovate. The EPA did not tell them to do this, by the way. They did this because there was a market approach, and that innovation paid dividends, and oh, by the way, they could achieve multiple goals. So would love to meet with you, would love to see all that you're doing. But this is the perfect example of all the balls. I'm sorry to go just a little bit long on this, but there's a lot of different things in priorities, goals. I call them juggling these balls in the air. You have these environmental issues. Of course, we want to preserve our environment, the air and the water. You've got the affordability issue of energy. You have the ability to have a geopolitical tool and a lever. Think about Ukraine and being invaded and the pipelines that were involved there. There's all sorts of issues, but innovation solves all of those. It solves for all of those. And that's why what we are attempting to do this week is so very important because it sets the conditions to have some success along those lines.
Well, thank you all for joining us. Good luck this week getting this wave of permit proposals out of the House. And then we're all ready to hit the ground running with you all in 2026 to get it to the President's desk. So thank you all for your leadership. Thank you for being here, and happy holidays.
Thank you.
Thanks.